Ndioma. Nkonye chere ya zere. So that covers the protocol bit in Igbo language. This collaboration came about when we were discussing about, with Lola earlier on this year in London, about promoting indigenous languages. And she mentioned that Yoruba language, there would be a panel on Yoruba languages. So that's how we ended up collaborating with Ake Festival 2018. Right. So basically, we need more collaborations in the arts, cultures, and indigenous languages. It's extremely important. Of all the continents in the world, Africa has the most languages, over 2,000. And out of those 2,000, over 2,000 languages, 40 languages have become extinct. And I'm sure you can agree with me, for these languages that have become extinct, the stories, the proverbs, the cultures, the knowledge, everything has died. Now, there are hundreds more that are about to die. So part of what we're doing is to make sure that all the writers, all the artists, everyone here thinks about writing or getting their work translated in all the various languages. Because if we don't do this, everything will just disappear. And languages and culture are intertwined. For example, in Igbo language, you cannot start anything without breaking a kola nut. And kola nut is not broken in any other language than Igbo language. So if we have children who cannot speak Igbo, how can they continue in the culture?
We have the annual Igbo conference in the UK. It's a chance to celebrate, to share knowledge, to engage in Igbo language and culture. And it's a conference that seeks for knowledge exchange. So it brings academics, creative people in the creative arts, and the general public to create a space for knowledge exchange for the betterment of all of us. And so we sort of seek to bridge this divide between these different spaces.
It's really, really important that we continue conversations, intellectual conversation in indigenous languages. And also, there's so much to be done in promoting our indigenous languages. Apart from writing our stories, we can also dip into the Western classics. Like, for example, I'm translating Alice in Wonderland now into Igbo, and there's no reason why she can't be... There's no reason why Alice cannot be answering Amaka and plucking mangoes instead of apples. So, Dalo Norine, thank you very much.
I came to think about one of the writers from my own country, Denmark, that I have liked the most. She was a lady, Karen Blixen, and it took her to come to Africa and to live here for 17 years to find her inner voice. Her very debut, that by the way she had to publish under the pseudonym of a man at that point in time, which is very unfortunate, but later on she stood her ground as a pioneer of women writers in the world. But her debut was, believe it or not, called Fantastic Tales. Gothic tales, maybe she should have called them fantastical tales, I think. In those tales, she said something very simple yet fascinating about the future. She said, God made the world round so that we should not be able to see too far down the road. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, for good and bad. We see all the richness that we see displayed here today, but of course we also see all the difficulties that we encounter on the world scene. And there we need artists, and we need the art to help open our eyes, to expand our horizon, because you are one of the few global languages that we have, together with food and love maybe, uniting figures of what make us human beings by the end of the day. So that innovative force, that force of creativity, is a vital and integral part of our societies and of our well-being. We understand that in the European Union, we hope, and we understand that without that, the human being is naked. And now bridging to the next speaker, let me just end by saying that maybe there is some truth to the words, that if only more politicians were artists and more artists were politicians, the world would be a better place.
Fantastical Futures is the audaciously inspirational theme of this iteration of the Ake Book Festival. Why do we in today's world dare to hope for a future so fantastic that it can be described as fantastical? The reason is, if I may offer one, that there is, for those who have cast this great vision, Lola and her friends and collaborators, they have not allowed their vision to be beclouded by the cataracts of discouragement that so easily beset us. Two of those cataracts to our vision are worthy of mention. The first is a disdain for introspection, which has just come over time. That capacity for deep thought, and making that the basis of planning and action. It's a disdain for introspection that causes our elite to spend or embezzle all the cash and opportunities of the present and make it the burden of a leaner future to pay for our corruption and carelessness. A failure to interrogate the past, coupled with a reluctance to explain the benefit of deferring gratification, is the creative also sometimes unable to stick to a cause because it may no longer be popular. Niyi Oshundare, a poet I'm sure that we're all familiar with, Niyi Oshundare, captures this elite inability to defer gratification in a provocative poem titled Eating Tomorrow's Yam. And I quote a portion of it. He said, "There is only one left in the village barn. The prodigal calls for a knife. What shall we eat tomorrow?" the people ask. If we finish all the yam today, just how shall we feel when the dunghill has relieved stomachs of their improvident burden? And says the prodigal, quote, "Tomorrow will take care of itself. How can we know the next day if we die of hunger today?" The recursive one step forward, two step backwards of our histories, especially in Africa, has caused Professor Tanure Ojaide, and I'm sure you're all familiar with him as well, in his angry style to ask, what poets do our leaders read? Again, Ojaide in his poem, "No Longer Our Country," remonstrates, and I quote him, "We have lost it, the country we were born into. We can now sing dirges of the Commonwealth only of yesterday. We have a country that is no longer our own." But even he, that is Ojaide, will agree that societies are built by men and women, not spirits. Which leads me to the second cataract that blurs our vision, and that is the failure to recognize the responsibility of the individual, especially the gifted individual. Does the artist have a responsibility to society beyond that of the ordinary citizen? Is there a civic tax payable on talent? Does the fact of your genius place upon you a moral burden to attempt to use the powerful voice of your art to fight for the soul of the land, especially to fight for the soul of the land from whence you came, to take moral positions? Are you, by virtue of your intellect and creativity, a moral agent, or are you not? Can you afford to be neutral? Can you be politically neutral? Can you, in the face of so much that needs to be done, poverty, deprivation, injustice, stay politically neutral? Can Africa afford to have its best talents wearing halos of political innocence and saying, "Let us leave politics to the scoundrels"? There is a growing impatience of the deprived millions of our people with the elite, which includes all of us in this room. The bombs tied to the 11-year-old body of Safiatu, a malnourished girl who has never been to school, cannot distinguish between a lawyer like Yemi Oshibaju or a writer like Molara Wood. The bombs do not discriminate. But two things before I take my seat. And one is in response to Lola, who asked for some kind of policy group for creatives. Earlier this year, The government established the Technology and Creativity Sector Working Group, a policy committee of federal government ministers and heads of agencies with creatives, tech and entertainment business owners. The group meets to work on policy, including rules and regulations regularly. So we do have now a policy group which takes into account the sorts of views that creatives may want, especially in formulating policy. And that is so for technology, persons in technology as well. So I think that there is plenty of room for expression, especially the way that we want to see policies shaped that could affect creatives and that could affect those involved in technology.
The question of domestic violence is only as an adult that I'm realizing how prevalent it was, and people I knew or people I know, and it's only in my 20s that I'm realizing, oh, okay, so that was what that was, and so I think yes, often you don't actually know when you don't know people's backstory. You just meet them and you continue from there.
Yeah. So I think Chibudu has given us a little bit of the context of her story. I should do this about Michael's book. And Michael's book is primarily about a woman named Belinda who works as a housemaid in Ghana, but then accompanies, or rather moves to London because her madam's or her auntie's friend needs somebody to help her teenage daughter come out of this weird slump, emotional and mental slump that she needs to be in. And at first, we start out thinking that Belinda is going to be, she's interesting, yes, but then she begins to display very interesting behavior. Like whenever she is upset, she cleans obsessively and uses cleaning as a way to pay for whatever imbalance is happening in her life. And we start to see the cleaning becoming more and more both metaphoric and literal. Mm-hmm. But tell us about this character called Belinda, who just, so much happening.
So Belinda was inspired by lots of the house girls that I saw cleaning homes in Kumasi when I would come over from London with my family, and we'd be staying with family in Kumasi and friends of family. And the housemaids, the house girls, were always very present, but incredibly silent. They didn't say a single thing. They always had this sort of look of great fear on their faces because they were kind of expecting to be beaten by someone at any moment. And I was always told very expressly that I shouldn't talk to the house girls, even though they were kind of my age and I might kind of be friends with them or they might seem like potential friends. I was very strictly told, that's not for you, that's not a no-go area. So they kind of occupied this quite weird space in my imagination where I started creating all sorts of stories about how they must have viewed the houses that they were cleaning, how they must have felt about me as this strange little kind of foreign person, essentially, that they were running around after, but that they couldn't interact with in any way. And so I wanted to think about those characters in a lot more detail. So that's the kind of background to Belinda's story.
We're going to have the authors read their passages for us.
This is so exciting. I've never read in Pidgin from Welcome to Lagos before, because I hate when I'm in an audience that doesn't understand Pidgin and they say, read from Pidgin, read from... I'm like, I'm not a performing monkey, please. Like, I'm like, why should I read if you don't understand what I'm saying? So this is so exciting. So this is Chike and Yemi. They are two former soldiers and they are looking for work in Lagos. And it appears that they have finally found work. Chike and Yemi had found work in the end. Not work that would turn them into laborers, nor work that was particularly challenging, but it was work nonetheless, and close enough to a military nature to be familiar. They had been at a crossroads waiting for a gap for pedestrians when the traffic warden fell to the ground. Her colleague ran out of the arrest hut, shouting, "Bianca, oh!" Chike approached. He had a smattering of first aid knowledge from military school, basic skills in wound dressing and artificial respiration. The male warden waved him away. "Abeg, help us control traffic." Behind him, the warden was hoisting his colleague into the arrest hut. The woman was conscious, but she let herself be dragged inside. "This your uniform too tight," he said. "Godwin, waiting. You want naked me? Waiting concern me with your breast. You dey squash this pikin for inside your stomach. Abeg, leave my cloth." "I've been telling you, Bianca, pregnant woman is not supposed to be doing this work." "You unko." See your stomach. You know, be pregnant man. Bianca, go home to your husband's house. I beg, leave me, Joe. Now who they control traffic? The woman, Bianca, sat up and called to Chike. Oga, well done, oh. He turned to acknowledge her greeting. She would have been pretty if her eyes had not been crossed, gazing at each other over her shapely nose. Either she or Godwin had freed her stomach from her uniform, and now it rested taut on her knees, her belly button protruding like a small fruit. You are doing this work well, oh. If to say you be policeman, you can just continue. Make I go home and rest. Tomorrow, Uncle, Godwin asked, if you faint again. I could come tomorrow as well, Chike said, halting one flow and beginning another. Or my friend over there could come. Oh, you are two, Godwin said. What's your name? Yemi. And you? Chike. Oh, Buibo. Which side are you from? Imbise. My wife is from there, Godwin said. Chike had lost track of how long the right stream had been moving. He put up a hand to halt them. Not yet. No, they cannot come again. Just that next time you will give them chance for longer. Oh yeah, make those other people they come. What work are you doing right now? Godwin asked. I'll stop there.
I actually loved that encounter. It was incredible. I loved it. Okay, so Michael?
Okay, so I'm going to read from the 10th chapter of the novel. I suppose before I sort of start reading, things that you need to know. Belinda has been in London at this point for about 2 weeks. And Nana, who's Emma's mother, so Nana is the person that she's sort of really working for, Nana has decided that Belinda and she should go shopping. What else do you need to know? The only other thing that you need to know is that, and lots of you will know this, I'm sure, Abroni is the Twi word for white people. So they're out shopping. Belinda walked behind Nana as they made their way along noisy Brixton High Road. Flat, late summer heat hung from Belinda's shoulders. The sky was bored, the traffic was angry. Everything around them beeped or screamed. People on bikes turned around to swear at people in cars. 3 striped white vans with swirling blue lights moaned. Buses bent round corners looking like sick caterpillars. Both Nana and Belinda were careful to avoid stubby black bins that choked on packets and bottles and that made Nana hiss, Lambeth Council. Like those words were bad kenke on her tongue. A tall man with wheels on his shoes sailed through it all peacefully. He overtook them until he became a thin, upright line between all the bodies in the distance. There was no space, the road was too full, the pavement too narrow to hold all the people pushing along it. Nana marched on, pointing forward with 2 certain fingers, swinging her yellow handbag with the little LVs on it. Belinda tried to match the pace, but she kept nearly bumping into everyone because the surroundings pulled at her attention so much. On her left, outside a huge shop, a group of children played silver drums that were like the bucket she'd used when fetching water from the stream when the village pump wasn't working. The children's music was a wobbling sound that shimmered on the air. 2 women with flopping hats stopped to dance in front of the band, wiggling their bottoms and holding their breasts. Near an even bigger stall, muscled men wearing small vests had arranged themselves in a circle. They casually held big guns made from coloured plastic, a joke of an army. They pressed their pretend weapons into the ground as though steadying themselves. A larger circle of girls formed around the men. The girls picked at the small jewels growing out of their belly buttons, touched the drawings on their arms, talked to the little dogs at their heels that bit at nothing. Every few seconds, one of the men pulled a trigger and water sprayed.
Black Britishness is it's the political and the national category that I guess that I most feel that I belong to. But I also feel that within that there are so many other aspects to my identity, being half Nigerian. My mother is Nigerian, and my father was English. Having spent some of my life in Nigeria, being a Londoner. So And there's also issues of whether I belong in Britain or not, or whether I belong in Nigeria. I feel a particular connection to the Caribbean as well, I think partly because of this feeling of slight alienation from both Britain and Nigeria, and the Caribbean is made up of a population that comes from elsewhere originally, so I feel an affiliation to the Caribbean. So my Black Britishness, I guess, is it's the identity that I'm most affiliated with, but it's also a blanketing of other aspects of my identity that are important to acknowledge.
I was actually invited to go and speak to the England team a few days before they went to Russia to talk about whether there's a version of Englishness that makes sense for the country that England has become. So Britishness and Englishness and Welshness and Scottishness are also mixed up in this debate about these multiple identities. I mean, the way I feel about it is that so many people I know from multiple different backgrounds and complex different backgrounds find themselves navigating around these senses of identity and nationalism, national loyalties. Which football team do you support? Which cricket team do you support? I don't know if you remember, but in the Japan-Korea World Cup, Nigeria played England, which for me was a draw, which was the perfect result. Because I did feel conflicts. I didn't want them to be playing against each other. So I hope next time they play it's a draw, maybe a 5-5 draw, so it looks a bit better, and then Nigeria goes on to win the Golden Boot. But this is normal. I think this is becoming normal in the 21st century. And also when people talk about mixedness and Britishness or Englishness, within my family there are people who are partly Nigerian but also partly Indian, because not all of my siblings who were Nigerian or half Nigerian, their partners are not always white or Nigerian. We have Persian members of our family, Welsh as well as English members of our family. So this hybridity, this complicated mixture, I think is becoming the norm, and I think it's going to get to the point in Britain where the majority of people, whether they are ostensibly white or black or brown, when you look at their big family album and the pictures of those big family gatherings, it will be unusual for everyone in those pictures to be of one race. And I think that's the way the demographics say we're going to in Britain. There's one statistic which I just keep banging on about as a journalist and historian when I write about England, which is 1 in 3 children at school age in England at the moment is non-white. They're either mixed, or they're black, or they're Indian, or they're Pakistani, or they're Bangladeshi. 1 in 3. That means in 20 years' time, 1 in 3 young adults, 1 in 3 voting young adults are going to be not white. That's the demographic projection. And I think very few of them, when they're old people, are going to look back at family albums and see a singular monochrome family background. This is the norm, I think. This is the future.
It does go some way to explaining it, but also you've got to remember that the places in the UK where they voted most for Brexit, say, who are most afraid about immigration are also the places where they don't have any immigration. It's the whitest places. It's places like the Isle of Wight, which is actually known for being very white. There's a lot of white people who live there. And so you can't just put it down to like, oh, they're seeing more kids in schools who are brown and black, and it's fostered by the media, it's fostered by powers outside of our control and outside of our literal vision. So yeah, it really saddens me that so many people are afraid of us existing in the country at the moment. Yeah.
But you could take solace from the fact that the people who've actually met us
weren't
like the
us.
people who voted.
Yeah.
It was people who don't know us who voted, who have this imaginary tabloid invented version of us, of non-white people, African, Indian, Caribbean. They're the people who wanted to leave. They're the people who put a problem with immigration. So, I mean, I write about empire, slavery, genocide. I'm not known for being optimistic.
Well, on
people who've read my books don't go, well, he'll be a fun guy. Let's get him around for a party. But I think there is a lot of optimism. The Brexit vote is a terrible thing. And, you know, I've said it on many panels, I've said it in newspapers, I've said it live on television. It's a disaster. It's one of the few examples of a country deliberately, knowingly damaging itself. It is one of the few biggest own goals in political history. But if you're going to take anything positive from it, it's old people who have old ideas they learned from a Britain that no longer exists, who voted, and it's people who don't have day-to-day contact with people of other backgrounds who voted. Young people predominantly, I think it's 80%, voted to remain. There's 1 million young people come onto the voting register since that vote, and 1 million people who voted leave have died since that vote. Brexit was a disaster and is a disaster. It's an ongoing rolling calamity. Every day I wake up thinking how we're going to escape. But there are positives.